Hi, good afternoon. I'm Valerie Plame, and I am absolutely delighted to be here. I'm a relatively new board member of Plowshares Fund, so I'm so grateful because in many ways I get to continue a lot of the work that I did in the CIA. This is my passion, nuclear weapons, making sure there's less of them in the world, and I get to act in ways that I did not anticipate when I left the CIA, shall we say. I have the honor of moderating a panel with three incredibly smart and highly accomplished women. And let me just take a moment to note that it is pretty rare in this field to have a panel with just women, much less all women. You know, sometimes hearing a diverse voices is a challenge. So how this is, I will just going to give a few remarks. I'm going to introduce the panel, talk to them a little bit, and then we look forward to turning it over to you all for questions and continuing the conversation. I'll keep track of the time. So Joe has told you a lot about our report coming out today. My essay was called The Break with Cold War Thinking. And the idea was, when I penned it a few weeks ago, it was to be an open letter to the president. And I can assure you that I did not anticipate the outcome that we now have, but that's reality. That's what we have. And it occurs to me when I was in my mind thinking that most likely we would be thinking about a Clinton administration, as I was drafting it, I thought, Hillary had spent most of her adult life really thinking about things like education, women and children welfare. And I wanted to say all of that, President Clinton, will be in jeopardy if you do not take care of these issues in strategic nuclear thinking, from budget concerns and so forth. Well, frankly, the same thinking applies to our now President-elect Trump. He has spoken a lot about building a wall. He has spoken about cutting taxes. Well, those are things that he has professed that he cares about, but all of them, too, will be in jeopardy if he does not address this question. We've heard our last speaker go on, you know, I can't even comprehend the type of money, as they say in Washington, now that's real money, you know, billions and trillions of dollars that we are proposing putting toward nuclear weapons. So there's just a couple other points in what I wrote. Was first, as I mentioned, the notion of the incredible expense of what is being proposed over the next 30 years, over $1 trillion. But happily, there's at least two things that you can do, as I was writing my letter to the new president, two things that president can do as soon as they are in office to lessen the imminent threat of nuclear weapons. One would be take off the table no first use. The second one is take off no launch on warning, no launch on warning policy. Those are two, they said, you know, you here in this room know better than most, there are no easy fixes in Washington, and certainly not in our highly polarized environment that we find ourselves in. But those are two things that I think that we can find to build some consensus around. Now, allow me to turn to our first panel speaker, Ellen. It's a delight to have you here. Ellen Tauscher is a former Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs during the first term of the Obama administration. And you served from the 10th District of California from 1997 to 2009. Thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
So, Ellen, you had a front row seat to the dawn of the Obama administration, his speech in Prague, April 2009. Those of us in this community had a great sense of hope Because, as we know, I think as a graduate student, President Obama had spoken about these issues. He had a personal stake in it. He goes off to Prague. The crowds go wild. And we thought, you know, we can really get some traction here on things. These are things that maybe we can move the ball down the field. But it didn't turn out quite the way that we had hoped. So I would like to start off, if you would, on, because of your unique position and how you've navigated this over the last few years, to speak about where we are now through the political lens.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me thank Joe and Tom and Plowshares and the Plowshares board and everyone for being here. And I'm thrilled to be on an estrogen-based life form panel. We don't get testosterone poisoning, which is apparently fatal for most people. So the reason I was asked to be undersecretary primarily was because in the Congress I sat on the Armed Services Committee for 7 terms and on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, and then chaired the Strategic Forces Subcommittee in the 3 years that I was there that we were in the majority from 2006 to 2009. And so I was also the only member of Congress that had a congressional district with 2 national nuclear labs in it. So my part of California has Livermore and California Sandia. So I had 10,000 people in my district that literally were some of the smartest people in the country, but could also make you glow in the dark. So it was important, as the first member of Congress to be from that district, to be on the committee of jurisdiction for the largest employer in the district. You know, you sit there for 14 years and you kind of learn a few things. But when I became chairman, I became chairman during a time that the Bush administration was looking to do, remember the bunker buster? Remember ROW? Well, I remember I did have my hands around its neck when it expired, because it was important that we actually take ROW and move it to something that was actually responsible. And we got bipartisan support for that. And I saw my friend John Tierney here, my former colleague, was here a few minutes ago. We were in the House together. And I also want to recognize Tom Countryman, who is the acting undersecretary, who is one of my 3 assistant secretaries and a terrific Foreign Service officer. So we had, you know, when the Obama administration came in and President Obama came in, it was very, very important that we, you know, take his specific interest in this issue. But we also had the inconvenience of the START Treaty expiring in December of 2009. You know, I know you don't either, but conversations with Hillary are very private, but I did call her. She rats me out in her book that I was one of the people that called her and said, please, they're going to offer you Secretary of State, take it. And then I spent 45 minutes talking about why it was important for us to deal with the fact that the Bush administration had virtually no relationship with the Russians. In fact, it was hostile, and that we had to get a new treaty negotiated. We didn't have enough time to do it because treaty art is very much like kabuki, and there's a lot about it that is time and effort and getting the right people in place and listening. But we only had, if we started on the day of the inauguration, we had less than 9.5 months, and we weren't going to make it.
So, Ellen, without revealing any confidences, please, what can you tell us about Hillary's response to, like, listen, we need to really pay attention to this?
She was great. So, of course, you know, no good deed goes unpunished. I was sitting in the Congress. I was in a seat that I could have had 10 years after I died. I was the chairman of a committee, a very important one that meant a lot to me, that I think I was actually adding value to. I was the leader of the moderates. They also got washed away. And, you know, here I was, and we were still in the majority. We didn't know we would lose the majority in the next election. And so Hillary, of course, called and said, you're going to have to come over here with me because we have to get this done. And I said, well, why would I do that? And then I realized it was the right thing to do, because you do it because, first of all, the president's asking you and she's asking you. And then I'm glad I did, because we did get it done. But you know, she knows a lot about this. She was absolutely integrally involved. When our team was over in Geneva, you know, we had both technical and we had political issues. And you know, we had a basket of things that were getting done pretty much at a fairly good clip, but then a couple of things became pretty recalcitrant. And when Rose Gottemoeller, who was leading our team, I would fly in and out, when Rose would call me and say, you know, I'm still hitting a wall on this, or I think I get some traction, and then Anatoly will call Moscow, and actually he comes back and it's further back beyond the wall that I thought it was. And so we would deploy Hillary, and we would deploy the president
Effectively,
to
obviously.
Medvedev, and they were very involved.
One last question. Can you just tell us, was there a moment during the last final stages of those negotiations when you thought, we've done it? Like, was there the last piece of puzzle that went into place? Or is the process simply like, yes, we're getting there? Or can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, there was this last kind of 90 days where we had these 3 issues on either side that were very tough to kind of unwind and to get clarity on. And so I went and I stayed for the 90 days. And at one point, I was pretty sure we had it. It was a Sunday morning, and it had snowed and it was freezing out. And I just kind of walked outside, and I first called Jim Jones, who's our national security advisor. And then I called Hillary, and because I wanted her to call the president. And when I called Jim, first thing he said to me, I said, we're done. And he goes, really? I said, yeah, really.
You made it sound too easy.
Really? Yeah. And then, well, I talked to them like 3 times a day. And then I called Hillary. It was Sunday morning. It was Sunday afternoon in Geneva. And she said, really? And I said, what is the story with this? I said, isn't that why I was here? And then they said, you don't leave right away because, you know,
just in case.
The mattress mice start to get into the middle of things, and all of a sudden things get jittery. But and then we literally flew to Prague.
Yeah.
And got and Medvedev and President Obama signed
So
it.
it did happen that quickly at
It
the
happened
end.
very fast. Yeah.
Wow.
After 90 days.
You worked hard.
Well, we all did. It was a fabulous team on both sides. And then what we, you know, I had spent my childhood on Wall Street. So I thought, well, let's make this our deal. Let's not do what we've done before, which was each team goes back to their capitals and then trashes the other team. You know, you can't do that anymore. Everybody's listening to everything. Everybody knows what everybody's saying. And I didn't, you know, we still had to get it ratified in a very unlikely set of circumstances. Because if you remember, we lost the House in November of 2010, and we had to get it ratified. And we were in a very tough political position. It was a big hit for the president, but both Hillary and the president kept doing it. But we actually had a deal where I sat with both Rose and Anatoly, and I sent them out on a roadshow, very much like you do for any kind of deal on Wall Street. I said, you know, let's do this together. This is our treaty. It's not the Russian treaty and the terrible Americans made you do these things, or, you know, the other side of that. You have to have a sense that this is our treaty, that we're doing this not only because of our responsibilities, because we have 96% of the world's nuclear weapons, but to the world. And we need transparency because the world needs to know that we're keeping our obligations. And we did a roadshow, very much like a Wall Street roadshow. We went to London, and we went to Brussels, and we went to New York, and we went to Moscow, and we went to Washington, both teams. And they sat together, and it was enormously successful. And it was tough to get it ratified, you can imagine. We were on the horns of a political dilemma, but we did a very big campaign. Let me thank all of the arms control groups, because they really did a fabulous job of helping us get almost 100 editorials toward getting it ratified. And at the end, I was in the hospital. I had a bad cancer, which I've gotten rid of. But John Kerry kept calling me, and I kept saying, I was croaking on the floor, send it to the floor. I said, where's Anthony? I saw Anthony. Anthony knows all this. I kept saying, send it to the floor, send it to the floor. We've got the votes. And they did. And John and Hillary and the president were fabulous. And we needed 67 votes. We had polling that showed we had 72% of the American people with us. What did we get? 71 votes, including Republicans, which was great.
Huge achievement.
Well, everybody in this room helped.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to Kennette Benedict, fellow board member at Plowshares, also a senior advisor to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. And you also lecture at the School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. But how I came to know Kennette was she is one of the very few who has even raised this issue of the complete lack of democracy surrounding this issue. No one else talks about this because it's nuanced and it has to engage your brain, because we're sort of like the fish in the water. What water? I mean, this is what we've always known since the days of Trinity. It is super secret. I know. I live down the road from Los Alamos, and that's how it's going to be. There's a couple people at the very top who are going to make those decisions, and the rest of us will just have to deal with it. And so that's, I want to say thank you for even bringing up this issue that is absolutely vital to what we think of as a democratic society, and yet in this instance has been shuffled off to the side. This morning, many of us were lucky enough to attend quite a few briefings up on Capitol Hill, and there is I think he's relatively new Congressman, Ted Lieu.
Ted Lieu.
Yes,
Yeah,
Ted Lieu.
California.
And he has recently introduced legislation on this very issue about the potential unconstitutionality of having what we call the National Command Authority to actually initiate a nuclear strike consists right now of two people, the President, Secretary of Defense. And you go, oh, wait a minute. You know, you like to think that there's all the checks and balances, but in this truly an existential question, you are relying on the temperament and the judgment of two people. So with that set up, I'd like you to speak a little bit more. You wrote about it so beautifully in the report, but tell us, what can we do? How do we remedy this? And another question is, how do you convey how important this is, that no one talks about it? Well, because we've been indoctrinated that don't ask too many questions. This is national security. This is nuclear stuff.
Right, and experts, yeah.
Experts.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Valerie, for that very good introduction. And thank you all for being here, and to the Plowshares Fund and Joe and Tom Kalina for this opportunity to talk about a little-known subject called democracy and the bomb. If there was a silver lining, or we heard about a pewter lining this morning, to this election season, it is that people suddenly began to realize that presidents actually can press the red button, as we say metaphorically, that whoever is in charge of the nuclear codes needs to be someone that we can trust and think of as reliable, someone who will have our best interests at heart, who will be steady, and who will understand the enormity of this responsibility. So it's a terrific opportunity then for the public to get engaged and find out more about nuclear weapons and about what they can do and what effects they'll have and what responsibility they have, we citizens have, in learning more about nuclear weapons and doing something about it. This legislation, which has been proposed by Senator Markey and Representative Lieu, goes to the issue of first use of nuclear weapons. And the idea is that the president cannot use nuclear weapons first without a declaration of war from the Congress. After all, it is Congress's duty, obligation, right to declare war. In fact, our founders, in their wisdom, felt that with such a huge decision with so much at stake, it really needed the largest body that we have in our government, that is the Congress, to declare war, to raise the money, to send people off to war. But I think the legislation may not be enough. Because I think it's clear that with prompt launch, with our deterrence policy as it is now, there's nothing that prevents the president from retaliating with a full-scale strike against another country if we think that we've been hit. So what I think we probably need is even greater attention to our force structure, to the deterrence policy that we have, and we need much more participation in that. In the end, the president really is a tyrant. And I think we haven't really understood that as well as we might. He or she has the ability to not only launch a first use, but also absolutely has the responsibility to retaliate against a strike that comes to us. And because the Russian forces and the US forces are on a very high state of launch readiness, that could happen, well, just about any minute now, right? And the effects of those weapons will be stunning. As you well know, they will wipe out whole cities. A few of them could really wreck the eastern seaboard of our country. The landing in Russia, taking out Moscow and all its communications, that would be devastating. And millions of people would die and be sickened for years to come. So these are consequential weapons. These are existential threat. And yet, most of us citizens, because of secrecy, because the speed in which these are used, have no say. And in that case, in that way, the president really is a tyrant. The Constitution, our founders were pretty smart. The Constitution then did make provision for declarations of war, for war fighting. But they really insisted that the Congress and the people, more broadly, be involved in those decisions. So I think it's time for us to think about, find remedies for the situation, get people more knowledgeable about it. And it may mean that we're going to have to say, you know, it's not enough for those of us in the room to say, oh, well, I'm an expert, I know, and let me tell you it's okay. I don't think that's going to be enough for people, and neither should it be. Because for an intelligent citizenry, a citizenry that has the responsibility to vote, they need to understand the enormity of the technology that we have, understand the consequences of it, and be able, therefore, to vote much more intelligently about the people who are going to represent us, and in particular, the commander-in-chief of the nuclear forces. So I've put a few suggestions in the paper. The no first use might be one. The State Department, the US State Department and the Defense Department are already beginning, finally, to publish numbers of nuclear weapons. Those have been state secrets for many, many, many years. But we might want to also open up things like the Nuclear Posture Review to much more participation by congressional members. Yes, it's held in secrecy, and we'll have to debate how secret they need to be. But these decisions are really so consequential for our country and for the world that I'm not sure it makes much sense anymore for us to do all of this behind closed doors. I know that in this community we have an interest in preserving our expertise and our knowledge and our ability to, shall we say, control events. I think we see that we don't always get that chance. And I think in more democracy, I'm someone who believes in democratic practice and theory, and I think more democracy usually is a good thing. And I think this is a great opportunity right now to make the case for much more democratic participation in a decision that will affect our lives and deaths and will actually speak to the long-term health and welfare of the planet. Thank you.
Kennette, let me just ask a follow-up. This is a town that holds on tightly to secrets, and because information is power, and the prerogatives that derive from that, and we hold nothing more sacred, of course, than the nuclear infrastructure. So how do you propose to pry those deeply vested interests away, even to allow just even a little bit of light to come? I mean, all your suggestions that you gave seem perfectly reasonable, but we're living in Washington, and we're in Washington, and people do not give up their prerogatives easily.
Absolutely right. It's a steep hill to climb, but I think there's so much at stake. Not only the nuclear weapons, but I think our democratic institutions are at stake. And I think if we want to continue to see ourselves as a democracy, as a representative democracy, and be that beacon for the world of a place where we talk about issues, we deliberate, these are the most consequential issues in the world. Yes, Phil, yes, we talk about education and health and all those kinds of things, but I think citizens understand that in a sense they've been infantilized. We treat them as children. They are wards of the state. Robert Dahl called this, you know, you are guardians of the arsenal. Well, guardianship means that there are wards out there somewhere, and they're the ones who we need to liberate, if you will, from that condition. Because I think this won't be the only election, and maybe this won't be the only election in which we have someone who is elected who we have grave questions about. Your expertise may have no help in this particular circumstance. And so we need to have a citizenry which is much more informed, knowledgeable, and ready to participate, ready to take on their responsibility, to vote for people who understand themselves what we are up to here.
Thank you for writing about this, thinking about this, bringing it to the fore. It's important. I'm going to turn now to our last panelist, Suzanne DiMaggio. Thank you for being here. She is a director and senior fellow at the New America, where she directs U.S.-Iran initiatives and leads the organization's growing body of international security projects related to the Middle East and Asia. Glad you're here.
Thank you, Valerie.
Suzanne also wrote for our report. The title of her essay was Learn from Iran, Engage North Korea. A perfect time. We're in, of course, a period of settling in and thinking about the new presidency. Very hard to read him on what his intentions are or what his tenure will look like. Let's start with Iran, because certainly campaigning, President-elect Trump said, this is the worst deal ever. I'm going to renegotiate it, toss it out, start all over. So let's start there. Tell us what are the prospects looking like now? Has he walked that back at all? And then we'll move on to lessons applied.
Great. Thanks so much, Valerie. Let me also thank Plowshares and Joe for inviting me to be part of this project. Also, I'd like to thank Tom Kalina and Jeff Wilson for making the process so smooth. It was a real pleasure to work with you. I must confess, when I wrote this essay, I think it was in August or September, maybe early September, I was expecting a different outcome like you, Valerie. And I reread the essay for the first time, I believe, yesterday evening in preparation for this. And
Just in time.
Now that I look at it in a different light, I don't think I would have changed anything. Well, maybe that's not completely true. I would have added a lot of exclamation points throughout. But other than that, substantively, I think it still stands, and in fact, in some ways, is more important than ever. Now, of course, on the Iran deal, it's taken up a lot of room and attention in the press. Whether or not the deal is on its way to a certain death or whether it'll continue, we really don't know. Candidate Donald Trump made a couple of statements about the deal, the fact that it was terribly negotiated on the one hand, but on the other hand, he asked out loud, why are the Europeans, the Chinese, the Russians benefiting from it economically and we're not? So on the one hand, it was a contradictory set of statements. And I think since he's been elected, he hasn't publicly commented on it. But let me first say, I think as he's putting his team together, and I understand from his latest tweet it's going very smoothly, that I hope he does read this report. I hope he reaches out to the expert community in this room and elsewhere. The bottom line is this is a deal that is working. It's been implemented now for the past almost a year. The IAEA has consistently reported that Iran is meeting its obligations. And also, I think it's very important to note that there was a previous deal in place, the interim nuclear agreement, that was being implemented as well for 2 solid years. So we now have almost 3 solid years of Iranian compliance with following these deals to the letter, and I think that's something we should not throw away. So obviously the deal has drastically reduced Iran's uranium enrichment capability. It has just wiped out its plutonium path to a nuclear weapon. It's also opened up Iran's nuclear infrastructure to the most intrusive inspection regime in modern history, or in history, not just modern history. And it has now expanded breakout capability from what was once 90 days to at least a year. That, to me, is a win. So if we just proceed on facts alone, it would be insane. It would go against U.S. interests to renege on this deal in any way. Now, the other part of this thing is I don't think Mr. Trump understands this is a multilateral agreement. It is not an agreement between the United States and Iran. And kudos to our negotiators who worked with our European counterparts, our Chinese counterparts, our Russian counterparts to put together this deal, and in such a solid way. If the U.S. was to back out of the deal, it would, I think, throw us into an immediate crises with our European allies. European countries now are steadily sending delegations, business delegations into Tehran. They're looking at direct foreign investment. We now have German banks, Italian banks who are interacting with Iran's financial system. The Russians, of course, are in there very deeply. And the Chinese, I think just yesterday, had a very senior level delegation there. This relationship with Iran and Iran's reintegration into the global economy is a part of their One Belt, One Road priorities going forward in their own foreign policy. And also, they're part of a major deal to develop one of Iran's gas fields now with Total, the French company as well. So Iran is slowly, because of this deal, it now has to meet international banking standards. It now has to meet anti-corruption standards, et cetera. So this is a deal that goes well beyond the United States. And let me make a couple more statements. It's interesting to see in these last few days and weeks who's come out in favor of the deal. Former head of Saudi's intelligence, Prince Turki, suddenly likes the deal, and he's advising that the United States stick with it. My understanding is just yesterday or today, Henry Kissinger, who is not a fan of the deal, has now come forward and said we should stick with it. I haven't heard from Chuck Schumer.
What
anyone
precipitated that? I haven't. Why?
It's working.
Well, I mean, why today? Why now?
Oh, he's been meeting with Mr. Trump.
Oh, I got it.
So I'm hoping he's listening to these people and taking it all in. That being said, we can't just rest on our laurels and assume that he will. I think this community, NGO community, others really need to be out there vocally making this point.
Well, to that, Suzanne, what do you say to critics who might say, well, you know, Iran has complied strictly within the nuclear deal, but their behavior in many ways has not altered in ways that we had hoped.
Right.
And you know that goes much further than just their nuclear capabilities. What do you say to critics?
So this was a deal that was strictly focused on the Iran's nuclear program. It wasn't a grand bargain. It wasn't a let's transform Iran deal. That would have never worked. The Iranians never would have agreed. They weren't ready to do anything like that. So I would say to Mr. Trump and his advisors, read the deal. I know it's 140 pages. That's a lot of pages. But take the time and read it.
Yes, but the question still remains. It was sold as this is the pointy end of the spear. The rest will, you know, that will help engender some changes that we in the West would like to see. And they really haven't, it's been disappointing.
There's no question. I mean, Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, is causing all kinds of trouble. What we're seeing in Syria is so profoundly disturbing. But at the same time, a byproduct of this deal, which I don't think gets talked enough now today, is we now have a direct, high-level channel to Iran. Government to government, which we really haven't had with this consistency for decades. And as we saw in the incident of our sailors that crossed Iranian waters, it wasn't handled ideally in my estimation, but it was handled quickly and in a way that avoided potential escalation. And that direct channel was responsible for that. There are other instances that I know of that haven't been talked about in the open where that channel has played a very productive role. So let's maintain it.
So, well, that's the perfect jump-off point. Lessons learned from Iran that we could perhaps apply to North Korea. How many administrations have we gone through that have knocked at that door and we've gotten, you know, we haven't gone through it yet.
Yes.
So, what can we learn? How do we, or are they not even analogous? So it's a completely different animal, forget it.
So let me first make the point they are such different cases.
Yeah.
The most obvious point is Iran never has possessed a nuclear weapon, and we know North Korea has and makes a show of it every chance they get. But there are others. Iran is part of the NPT, North Korea isn't. I've had the unique opportunity to travel on multiple occasions to both countries, and I can tell you anecdotally on the ground, these are two different countries. They're two different political systems, economies, societies. I mean, I could just go on all day. But my point in the article is not so much that the Iran agreement is a blueprint. It's the negotiating process, how we began engagement with Tehran after decades of an adversarial relationship, a profound gap in trust that I see also exists with the North Koreans. So that's what I was extrapolating. What are some of the lessons learned? And in my work at New America, I have access to both Iranian officials through the Track 2 I've been doing for many years and to a Track 2 I've been doing with the North Koreans. And there are some lessons. I think the fact that the United States began the discussion and negotiations with Iran very quietly, let's face it, in secret.
Yeah.
I think those were, that was an important opportunity to get to what they called a win-win narrative, to really have these 12 meetings over time to flesh out what are the red lines, what are the places where we can agree, where can we make agreement. And by the time they actually forged that interim agreement, it had basically already been written by the time the Europeans and others came in.
Sat down.
Yes.
Thank you. Before we open it up for questions, because I'm the moderator, I get to ask one lightning round. Anyone can answer. Okay, you ready? The first question, there are 3 questions. First question, just by chance you happen to be at some event, say you're at the United Nations, and believe it or not, you step on the elevator with Donald Trump and a couple Secret Service guys, and you've got 7 floors. What do you say to him on this issue?
You hit the stop button.
The emergency button.
The alarm?
No, you hit the stop button.
Because you want more than 7 seconds.
And what do you say?
I don't think he's got the attention span for his 7
You don't
minute,
even, you don't even
7-second
7
elevator
floors?
speech. No. I think, no.
This is a true elevator speech. No? You're not going to take advantage of that?
I think you have to know that. No, I don't think that you can do that with him. First of all, they're not going to let somebody else on the elevator. But
This is hypothetical, Ellen. Okay.
Well, I would tell him to read this report first and foremost. And I would have a copy with me, I'm sure.
Tweet it first.
But I would
Pull
really,
that out of your purse.
I mean, for my issues, I would probably play up to his vanity and say, you and you alone can solve this problem with North Korea.
Oh, good. That's good. Okay.
Excellent.
Second question. Recommendations for the best book or best movie or best TV show on this issue can be, you know, there's many, many out there. What do you like? What does anyone like?
Well, The Day After Trinity is always a classic about the scientist movement and their horror at what they had created in the way of a nuclear bomb and how much they felt they had really squandered an opportunity to inform the public and also inform officials about really how terrible nuclear weapons are.
It's called The Day After Trinity.
It's called The Day After Trinity, and at the end, someone asked Oppenheimer, well, you know, when do you think we could have achieved an international disarmament treaty? When do you think we should have been working on that? And he said, the day after Trinity. That is, we should have been working from the very beginning to deal with the international implications of this extraordinary technology. And it still resonates today. I show it in classes to undergraduates, and they still get it. Yeah.
I think that the millennials should see fail-safe.
Okay.
And read
All
it
right.
too.
I failed
Fail-safe.
because I should have said, other than Joe Cirincione's book, Nuclear Nightmares, other than that,
That's a
Other than
good,
that one,
caveat.
Command and Control.
Definitely,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Okay, has anyone seen that?
film.
The
Yes,
film?
yes,
I haven't seen
yes,
it yet. Okay,
yes.
final question, and then opening up to you. We all have heard so much over the last months over President-elect's relationship with Putin. We don't know how that's going to play out. But what is the most likely area, most likely place where we can find common cause with them, that he might be able to parlay his touted relationship, whatever that takes? Where can we, in this field, where do you think we could take the first step with them?
I think we need to talk about, you know, simultaneous unilateral reductions in nuclear weapons. I think that the Russians, I don't think, really want to keep spending all this money on nuclear weapons and on modernization plans. Their economy is in tough shape. They could use the money for many other things. You know, President-elect Trump could tout this as a major accomplishment. You know, he doesn't, I'm not sure whether or not he wants to use nuclear weapons. He's asked why we have so many. So I guess one answer is, well, we don't need them that much, so let's get rid of them. So that would be, you know, whether you know, Ukraine and the Crimea are kind of tossed to the winds in that deal, I don't know, which would be horrible. But I think it might be a moment. It would be a Reagan-esque kind of thing. He says he admires President Reagan. So it might be a way in which to get these, at least get the weapons vastly reduced, and I think that would be a great outcome.
I think we need to spend some time really understanding and really being very sanguine about President Putin's motivations and why he's doing what he's doing, and being more realistic about it than aspirational. You know, they have expressed continuously they have no interest in further arms reduction talks. Frankly, they don't really want to talk about anything. But I think we have to understand that he's a Kremlin creature. And we have to understand the Kremlin. And the Kremlin is very much of a 20th century organization, holding, you know, with death claws, trying to figure out how to keep things going. I actually had one general say to me at one time, ma'am, you know, if we actually cooperated with you on some of these things, I don't know how I would get my budget next year.
Yes.
I get my budget by showing a picture of what you bought yesterday
Yeah.
and saying, I've got to counter this.
Right, right.
You know, they've done this for 50 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so they need a new paradigm.
Yeah, they need to turn that up. on its
They
head.
need a new way of doing business, but you know, they kind of like the way they do business. And I think if we understand that Putin is a Kremlin guy, this is about the Kremlin, this is about keeping that military going, happy with him. You know, he apparently doesn't really care about the Russian people. If you know any of the new statistics, it is a deplorable situation. It's almost a bankrupt gas station called a country, but they've got nuclear weapons, and they are frankly indispensable to us in the P5 and many other places where we need them. And God knows the people of Syria are suffering tremendously because we can't get an understanding on how to go forward. So, you know, I think we have to be pretty cold and analytical about this. I'll just say one last thing. Government is not business. Am I for more business-like things in government? Yeah. Am I for people really understanding how to, you know, balance budgets and do things like that? Yes. But government is not business. And Mr. Trump is in for a shock. because of many of the things that he has said throughout the campaign. Bad deal, da, 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 da. I mean, he can't tell you about the deal. But if you just, my sense is, and my fear is that he's applying business principles to what he thinks the outcome of the deal is.
Well, that's why he got elected.
We take, look, let me tell you, as the United States, we take crappy deals all day long to make sure that allies and adversaries are put in a position that we think is the best thing for the American people. Sometimes we have to do things that we have to hold our nose and don't like at all, because it is the way for us to get democracy for us and safety for ourselves and for other people. So I think they're missing the ... next piece of this. Because if you just apply business principles to things, you might get good business deals, but you're going to get crappy diplomacy, and you're going to find yourself tipping over on friends and adversaries all day long. So I think there's a learning curve for Mr. Trump. Hopefully we can all live through it. But the key here is what actually is the Kremlin relationship and the relationship for Putin. How does he understand that? I would put Suzanne in the elevator with him, by the way.
Please join me in thanking Ellen, Kennette, Suzanne. What they have contributed to this field, the reason we're all here in this room together, presumably you all care a little bit about this, but what they have contributed individually and collectively is really significant. So
And Valerie.
thank you.
And Valerie.
Great patriot.
So let's open it up for questions. Yes, sir, right here. There's a microphone.
Thank you, great panel. Mark Fitzpatrick from IISS Americas. Suzanne, I agree with everything you said and what you wrote in your good article
Thank you.
about applying some lessons, recognizing the differences. The engagement strategy with North Korea. I understand, when I say the same things, sometimes people kind of wink at me. They say, well, the United States tried, not just in the Leap Day deal of 2012, but more recently, and there just wasn't anybody in Pyongyang like Rouhani and Zarif.
Yes,
So that's one problem. And the other thing is that the Iran deal, of course, succeeded, not just because we engaged, but because there was give and take, compromises. The United States compromised in a big way in changing the no enrichment policy. So in your talks, or as you assess it, do you anticipate any kind of similar give and take that would work?
In the informal talks we're having, there are, I do see some opportunities for compromise. I don't want to oversell it. It's going to be hard. It probably would be even harder than the Iran deal. I think in the case of North Korea, there are some hard truths that I don't think this current administration, has been willing to face up to. I think Bill Perry said yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, North Korea has a nuclear weapons program.
Right.
And the administration's reluctance to be able to utter those words and meet with them and negotiate with them on that basis, maybe the time now is to move on from that and recognize it and find a way to deal with it. The point of individuals that you raised, Mark, is so important. I was in Pyongyang in February, meeting with government officials there, and one of the first questions I asked them was, where is the Javad Zarif of North Korea? I would like to meet him. Well, there is really no such person. Maybe the current foreign minister, Ri Yong-ho, is as close as we come. But individuals matter, and the case of North Korea makes it more difficult. The fact that they have one leader, maybe that would make it easier. I don't know. Iran has a supreme leader, but as you know, the Iranian political system, there are competing power centers. It's not as monolithic. So I think a case could be made each way. But my main point is that just as President Obama came into office with a real clear commitment to pursuing these negotiations and making it a priority of administration, we don't have a choice with this next administration, knowing what we know, how they're advancing. And it could be within President Trump's next tenure, 4-year tenure, where they achieve the capability to send a nuclear tipped missile to U.S. soil, it has to be a priority.
That's right.
Roger.
Roger Hale, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Kennette, you said that what we really need is an informed citizenry. And there was nothing in this past election which indicated to me, at least from the winner's standpoint, that informed citizenry was a driving factor. And in fact, we heard this morning, and we've heard many, many, many times over the years, that we don't even have an informed Congress, where presumably there are a lot of people who have been interested in issues, many of whom are highly educated, and they just do not understand these issues of nuclear weapons and nuclear warfare and nuclear materials. So I guess I would pose the question to all of you and anyone else is, how do we get these issues boiled down to a simple enough statement that we can make progress on having an informed citizenry?
Well, I think it takes more than sound bites to inform a citizenry and slogans. I'm afraid we've gotten used to those as ways of our national discourse, and I think that that's probably a mistake. These are complex issues, and but people are pretty intelligent, actually. If you talk to them about nuclear weapons and spend 10 minutes on it, at least in the courses I teach when I do public speaking, there are plenty of people who are very concerned. But the way they preface their question is always, well, I'm not an expert, but, and then they ask some of the most profound questions about nuclear weapons that you could imagine. So there's a feeling, there's a reticence. You know, I'm not an expert, so how can I know about this stuff? When in fact, they do want to know. And I think congressional members are not encouraged. They're not, again, it's the business of secrecy. You know, Les Aspin was said to have asked about the PSYOP, and you know, the command said, well, you know, that's not a need to know. You don't need to know that. He was, I mean, what do you mean he doesn't have this, you know, Foreign Relations Committee doesn't need to know? Of course they need to know. But so there's a way in which we need to somehow open up the discussion. Now, Valerie and I have yet to have the very profound discussion about how much secrecy we can do away with. But I think we could probably do away with quite a bit, and because people don't understand the effects of the weapons, they don't understand how quickly they can be launched, they don't know how many we have and what the damage is. And I think once they begin to get that, let that sink in, I think many of them will stand up and take responsibility for that.
If I'm not mistaken, oh, excuse me, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't Bill Perry, part of his project has to do with educating?
Yes.
It does.
Young people.
But we
I'd
have
like
to have
to
something. We have to have something to tell people to do. So, do you want something to do? So, President-elect Trump has put out some names that he's considering for different cabinet positions. The Department of Energy manages the nuclear weapons complex. I was on a congressional panel after I left the House and after I left as undersecretary, because I've been a critic of the NNSA for a very long time. I'm considered the mother of the NNSA. It's not my fault. There were two fathers. And you can imagine how that got messed up. And we never got any of the reforms we needed to make the NNSA actually work. But DOE has everything to do with maintenance and modernization, stockpile stewardship. And chronically, the DOE head secretary is somebody from the oil patch. And that poor person walks in, finds out that 60% of their budget and their work is the nuclear weapons complex. They have a mini stroke, and some PDAS is now in charge of the nuclear weapons complex. So you know what we should be doing? We should be telling President-elect Trump, do not nominate anybody for Secretary of Energy that doesn't have nuclear weapons expertise. No friend of yours whose wife gave your campaign a lot of money should be the Secretary of Energy. And that's what we can do today. We can all do that today. We can mobilize around things. I mean, there's a political component about this that's very important. It was difficult during this existing administration because President Obama was for a lot of the things that we're for, got a lot of things done in the first 3 or 4 years, got virtually nothing done in the second half because of Congress and political will and a lot of other things. circumstances. But let's face it, we don't have any expectation that this administration is going to be for any of the things we're for. We need to mobilize. Yes. We need to get people out there. But the first thing we can do is demand that the Secretary of Energy not be some guy that knows only about oil fields, when 60% of that budget and 60% of the expertise sits on a nuclear weapons council, that this person has to have nuclear weapons expertise. We're very lucky that currently Secretary Moniz is one of the best people in the world to be Secretary of Energy. We want their equivalent of Ernie Moniz. And we can do that today. We can all be on Facebook, we can be on Twitter, we can be writing letters. We need to mobilize about that.
I thought he wanted to get rid of the department to be.
That's not happening. That's not happening.
I think we have time for maybe 2 more. Yes.
Ethan Kelly from Washington State. So we know we have a president with a short attention span. We also know we have a president who more than likely feels on top of the world right now because he just took over one party and defeated another in his first tryout for political office. A book came out within the last year about the history of the president's daily brief. So I'm curious, that book talks about how different presidents either use or don't use it and how they either absorb or don't absorb information. Knowing kind of what we think we know about this president to be, what would you most want to see in that daily brief for him?
Short words.
I'd like to see them do it on a TV, because I don't really think he's read in 50 years.
I think he's very visual.
And I think he watches TV, and I think that we would have to have it like a closed circuit television with just people coming in all day long saying, Mr. President, this is what you need to know about this is what you need to know about that, and just have him sit there, maybe in his bathrobe, and couldn't tweet during it because it's classified. But I think that, I'm being facetious, clearly, but I'm terribly worried.
Yeah.
You know how with every new president that comes in, that briefing is adjusted to what they want. They get to say how they want it, how they want to receive it, whether it's verbal, whether it's written, whether it's a 3-ring binder, whether it's got tear-out pages. It is totally personalized. So you're right. I think from what we understand, the president-elect is not a big reader. So maybe he is going to be briefed
by a talk show host.
Right, on a TV.
Yeah. Anyway, it's highly individualized.
And then to the question of after figuring out the platform that might best work for him, what would you most want to see him, especially the first, say, 60 days out, what would you want to see in that briefing?
You.
Well, I will say, Valerie knows more about this than most people do, but let's just say his kids can't have top secret clearance. Let me tell you something. National office and the world that many of us have lived in is many things, but what it is definitely is isolating and lonely. You don't get to do like on a game show, call a friend. I'm going to read something scary. Let me get somebody to sit with me. And then let's have a glass of wine and we can talk about it. That's ridiculous. All of it is about need to know.
Right.
His children have no need to know. Certainly if they're running the business, they can't know. So the whole idea, and so you start to hear these things and you think to yourself, this is almost farcical.
If it wasn't so dangerous.
Except it wasn't so dangerous,
Yes.
and it wasn't so completely inappropriate. But I think that he may be on a big high, but he's going to hear a lot of no's. A lot of the nominees that he's put forward, either have big conflicts, or frankly, no expertise, and you would think that someone who knowledgeably doesn't know a lot and has said he doesn't have any experience and ran on the fact that he didn't, would surround himself with people that did. That's a test of maturity, and that's a seriousness of understanding what the task is. Yeah. I don't have any expectation he's going to do that.
Let's do these last 2 ladies in the back, please.
Florence Lowley, Global America Business Institute. We work on U.S. Korea nuclear energy issues. And this question is to Suzanne, actually. President-elect Trump had repeatedly said he's open to a dialogue with North Korea leader Kim Jong-un, and vice versa.
He said the opposite too, yes.
Right. So he Trump is a negotiator and dealer. And whatever the deal that both of them will come up with, it is possible that there may be some sort of a deal. And your paper suggests a six-party dialogue and discussion, but regardless, this is dialogue, right? It's a bilateral, but it's still an engagement and dialogue.
Yes.
And it is very possible that they may leave Republic of Korea, South Korea, out of the discussion and in the court. It's just a little bit of a concern on all around the world. How do you see that?
Yes. So if I was advising President-elect Trump on this issue, I would definitely go with my plan as elaborated in that paper before. I said, why don't you meet with Kim Jong-un? Why don't we do that first? I would save that for later. I think it's because of the level of mistrust, the fact that both sides have demonized each other to the point where, you know, the only other thing that comes close is Iran. That low-key, lower-level discussion, I think, really helped pave the way to reach a number of understandings, address a lot of the threat perceptions and so on. So that's what I would recommend. Of course, along the way, in the paper, my essay, I said either six-party talks or a new regional security arrangement. Maybe we need to move on from six-party and look at something anew. I'm open to that. But it's absolutely vital that our allies, South Korea and Japan, are part of this process along the way. I think I've heard officials from both countries at one point or another recognize the fact that the U.S. really needs to take the lead on this issue. We cannot rely on Beijing to do it. They're important, but we can't rely on them. And just in the case of Iran, I think Israel was quite surprised by what the United States had done. But the U.S. had to take the lead with Iran, even before the P5+1 got involved in the weeds. I think it's the same case with North Korea. We have to reach an agreement with Pyongyang on some basics. Even before that, we really just need to sit down and hear what they have to say. I mean, I'm such a proponent of dialogue just to learn in the first place. And as I said in the paper, if we don't reach a breakthrough the way we did with Iran, it's still worth the trip because our knowledge of that country is so limited. It is a detriment to us. It's a detriment to our policymaking. The policy of strategic patience is a grand failure. We just can't continue down that road.
We have time for one more quick question.
So my name's Diane Russell. I'm finishing up my final term in the Maine House of Representatives, and I have stepped down from the Board of One to build the political department. So this is somewhat new to me because I've been working on Pentagon budget spending for a long time. And frankly, Samantha Smith came from my state. She was a little girl that wrote a letter to the USSR that helped bring down the Cold War. Since the Berlin Wall fell, I haven't really paid too close attention to nuclear weapons, and I think that's pretty true of the vast majority of Americans. When we instituted the START Treaty, we were able to really, again, say that this was moving forward pretty quickly and that we actually had everything in hand. In the last 6 or 8 weeks, I think all that's changed. The entire campaign centered around one word, temperament. And so I think that America now is in a different place to have this conversation. So I'm curious to hear from you all, finally a panel of women, about what you think that America needs to hear and how we can capitalize on this moment to be most effective in achieving some of the results that many folks in this room have tried to for several years.
I think the question, to condense it down, is this moment an opportunity? And if it is, very briefly, a couple words, if it is or if it is not. Maybe it's premature. What do we all think?
Just very quickly, on the issues I deal with, the new administration is always an opportunity, even if it's headed by President-elect Trump. And that's the way we should be looking at it, people in the expert community, think tank community. We have to look at it in that way and try to put forward the best ideas, the best policies, as this report has tried to do. So that's...
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity. I think we already see, after the shock and awe, an interest on the part of many people, or everybody. I mean, they're marching in the streets, right? So there are many people out there who think that we need to be to look anew at what our policies are and how we choose our leaders and how much information we need to help us choose them. So I think there's already an appetite. At the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, the day after the election, we had 30,000 hits on our doomsday clock quadrant, and letters, please, you know, what are you going to do with the doomsday clock? What does this mean for our future? I don't want to die from nuclear weapons. So people understand what's at stake here. So I think it's a terrific moment, and it's one where, you know, we need to tell them, you're the experts, you need to tell them what they need to know in order to make sure that we put pressure on congressional members and also put pressure on President Trump.
It is a moment, but I've seen moments like this pass before. I think we have to understand that there is a political component to this, and it's not partisan, but it is about politics. We've just had an election, you know, not the outcome I wanted. People are already looking at the 2018 election. We've got a lot of people up in the Senate from red states that are Democrats. We've got the entire House up again. We have to have a political mobilization. We have tried with facts that are very persuasive to tell people that this is crazy, what we're doing. And we haven't persuaded them. Yeah. So obviously we're not singing their song. We're not dancing to the tune that they understand. I think that, let me tell you, I ran 7 times, won 7 times, but let me tell you, you have to let people understand that we're not going to support people that don't start to get on our side on these things. And they'll get to know it really fast, believe me. If they believe that their job's at risk because of this, they'll start to understand it very quickly. Right now, they don't feel like anybody's holding them at risk. They feel as if they've made the decision that most people have made, that these are political weapons that no one's ever going to use. Well, if that's true, we should have 3 of them in a pretty box in a museum that have been technically dismantled. We shouldn't have thousands and thousands of them that lots of people can put on the plane and fly around without anybody telling them they can, and mistake over here, mistake. This is crazy. So we have to basically say, no. You know, General Cartwright, one of my personal heroes, you know, we should be saying to this administration, you know, Mr. President, you're leaving in 70 days. Cut the arsenal to 1,000. Get rid of the hedge weapons. Do it. We're watching. We know where you're going to live. Yeah. But we have to, you know, I mean, clearly, if this was about intellectual persuasion, being right, and being factual, we would be winning, right? Mm-hmm. Why aren't we? Let's talk their language.
And on that note, join me in thanking our panel.